I find that a lot of people are too quick to tell themselves a narrative as to why they can't do something rather than spark the initial question that's going to lead to more questions that will lead to the infrastructure that you have to build to get to the next level. As business owners, there's an element of ego that prevents you from understanding that you are the bottleneck in your business. Every single component of your business that you feel is not replaceable is in fact replaceable, right? Anyone else can make those decisions that you are making. When you don't have the money, when you don't have the financing, when you don't have like the people, the network to kind of execute on something, it's like, a lot of people are very quick to tell themselves a narrative as to like why they can't do a deal. But if you don't have the money, like how can you find that money? If you don't have the financing, how can you get that financing? Always ask the question of how.
Problems are what? Problems are profits!
Welcome to the Problems or Profits podcast. My name is Rebecca Lynn Matheson, aka the Canadian Cottage Girl, and I've got special guest host Adam JD Martin with me today, who's taken over Matt McKeever's spot, and we have some very special guests today, Aaron and Ariana, who are on the podcast, and I cannot wait to hear a little bit more from them. So what we're going to get started with today is just what problems or profits means to me. And for me, it really means finding any challenges or obstacles that are in your way in your business, and just that mindset of being able to take that on, and no matter what it is, finding a solution to get to your goals. So starting from the top, really workshopping the problem and bulldozing through it. So that's really what problems or profits means to me. It's a mindset of how you're going to continue to move forward. So welcome to the Problems or Profits podcast, guys. And thank you so much for coming on today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you for having us. We're excited to be on.
Awesome. Well, we're going to get started here with some warm-up questions, break the ice a little bit. So first, and probably my most favorite icebreaker question that we always ask is, what is the most expensive thing that you've ever broken?
Expensive thing we've ever broken.
You want to go first?
Most expensive thing I've ever broken. If we're talking about material things, I don't know.
I can jump in here.
Yeah, I
don't want to sound cheesy, but I think the most expensive we've broken was our focus. So initially we started off in our business through rental arbitrage, and we had a really good thing going, but instead of really digging down and scaling what we had going initially, we started to look at other avenues of profits, and we started to look into starting a beauty salon.
Right. Yeah.
It was like a microblading and kind of.
It was still sort of like an arbitrage approach, because it wasn't like we were going in there, or I was going in there and doing lashes or doing any sort of beauty service. It was more of getting the space, setting it up, and then having, workers come in and do their services there, and we would split the profit. But we
ended up closing the beauty salon during COVID, actually. And when you think back in terms of like the opportunity cost of what that 1 year could have led to, I think that was probably the most expensive kind of thing we've broken, was our focus, when we should have just kind of dig deep into what was already working, instead of diverting our focus into different avenues of business or profit centers, right? So
it was like the shiny object syndrome, when
we're like, oh, well, cool. We got this one thing going. Let's try doing other things. Maybe we have like a magic touch that, whatever we touch will turn to gold, but that didn't quite happen or pan out. But in retrospect, I think looking back, we learned a lot through that 1 year of failure. And I think we were able to kind of double down and really start scaling our rental arbitrage business when we started to dig deep. But I think that 1 year, of course, like time is the most scarce resource, right? So I think in terms of what was the most expensive thing we've broken, was our focus for that year.
If you guys don't mind me asking, how long were you doing the rental arbitrage before you decided to try this other opportunity?
A year, I believe. I think it was about a year.
Yeah, it was like almost a year, I think.
Yeah, I think it was almost a year. And then we were looking for other opportunities. And at the time, I don't know why, we just weren't looking in the right direction. We started looking at different things like beauty and all that stuff. And once we started going that direction, the arbitrage sort of took a side. Yeah,
became more of a side
Exactly.
hustle rather than like our main business, right? So
I think this is one of the most common failures that I see in every entrepreneur I've ever talked to. So we've had the opportunity with Cashflow Tribe to talk to hundreds, if not thousands now, of investors and different types of entrepreneurs. And one of the most common problems that I do see that really sets people back, and I think you said a couple of great words there, opportunity cost was probably the biggest one that stuck out to me. But, you know, this is the most common symptom is people will move on and transition inside the first year. And it's actually, that's why I asked that question. It's 99% of the time, it's within 1 year of finding success in one strategy, people want to pivot. And we see this all the time with our wholesalers. We see this all the time with real estate investors in general. You know, they'll go make $50,000 on an assignment, and then the next day they want to go do a flip, right? Yeah. Without really understanding, you know, what are all the nuances of what makes a successful flip, right? And I think quite often the biggest thing that people don't do is actually the research and going out and finding out what it is that it took to get to the point at which somebody could do that other strategy successfully, right? So we see this all the time with our wholesalers who make really good money on the assignment fee, but then they'll look at somebody making exceptional money on the flip, but they fail to ask the question of how many unsuccessful flips did you have before you got to this point, right? How much time did you invest in cultivating the right power team in order to execute on this flip? How much was luck factored in and based on where the market was at for appreciation that day, right? What were all those little dominoes that added up to that success story? And I think that's where a lot of entrepreneurs go to fail, is just by jumping too soon. And I think what Matt and I have really taken away from our experience in the last few years is that you legitimately need to spend, and for us, it's an arbitrary timeline, but for us, we legitimately need to spend 3 years on a project before it becomes truly profitable. Because inside that first year, I find because everybody's so passionate, you end up getting these really cool results, but it's a honeymoon. Right? It's just like anything. Yeah. You're honeymooning on those results. And then invariably, there's always some sort of dip. And that's where you think, oh, look at this other strategy that's making money. Maybe we should go dabble in that. But that's a huge, huge, huge mistake. The dip is just telling you that it's time to systematize, codify, and create a better standard operating procedure so that you can actually run a efficient business that's effective over the long term. And I think that's our biggest takeaway. So it's really cool that you guys talk about that today.
Yeah, and I love what you said there. It's because you got to go through the ups and downs to really figure out what is required to have the scalability in your business, rather than, you know, oh yeah, we tried this thing for the first time, and because we've worked like 60 hours a week to kind of get this thing going, like we saw some success, but then, you know, that's not replicable over time, right? You have to really go through those setbacks and those failures and really figure out the little quirks of your business to kind of tweak it so that it's actually scalable, rather than trying to pivot to something else just because you feel like, oh, well, this thing worked, so the next thing must work, kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think some of the worst times in our businesses' health has been its most profitable times. And the reason why I say that is because that is where the complacency is rooted, right? It's when we're bringing in good deals, or in the case of arbitrage, you know, we're fully booked. Right? We've got these Airbnbs, they're fully booked. We're totally good. We're cruising. Let's look at other opportunities. When instead we should be thinking, oh my God, we're fully booked, right? What does this mean if we just had more? How do we scale this? How do we actually create a power team that could enable us to have, you know, 10x the fully booked listings, right? In the case of arbitrage, or in the case of wholesaling, how could we 10x our actual revenue? Well, I think you got to 10x your team. Okay, cool. Well, that turns into a whole other series of challenges that you really have to embrace, right? If you ever want to really grow a big sustainable business. And I think sustainability maybe is the key, because just what you mentioned there, if you're working 60 hours a week, that's not going to last, right? But maybe that's what it takes to build the system that works, right?
Right. Exactly.
That's right. Awesome. I definitely very much appreciate the back and forth there in that dialogue, because I really want to highlight for people listening, like the shiny object syndrome is so easy to get as an entrepreneur, especially as a creator, when you are very inventive and you have a lot of ideas or you see a lot of opportunities and things. It is so easy to get distracted by that next big thing before you actually fully build and scale a business that works and a business that you can run without really having to like be in the business. So I think that that's a really great lesson that a lot of people will be able to take away from. So next warm-up question here for you guys is, if you had $1 million in only 24 hours and then that $1 million completely disappears, what would you do with that $1 million?
I love this question. I feel like a lot of people kind of think, oh, $1 million, let's preserve that and try to put into like, some other asset that's going to retain that value. But for me, it's like, if that $1 million is going to disappear after 24 hours, I would spend it on something that's going to provide me an intangible benefit. So whether it's going to be to spend that money to get me in a room with people who are going to elevate me to the next level, or to spend it on marketing to bring more awareness and attention to myself and my brand, I think that's going to provide more benefits long-term than just trying to think about ways to preserve that $1 million as best you can. So it would have to be some kind of intangible where, I don't know, I get into a room with some really high level people, or on like a marketing kind of spend. That's my take on it.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. I mean,
that's a unique answer. So like, I guess I wonder, with 24 hours and just to run through this thought, like having only had 24 hours, who do you think you would try and get in a room with? Because like, that I think is the harder question, right? Like, okay, if we're going to spend it intangibly, who or how, right? Like, how are we going to find the right marketing strategy? What would that look like? Because like, I think if you found that answer, you might know where to put all of your resources, right?
Exactly.
So
I think that's like the biggest question.
I don't think we figured that out yet.
Yeah. I mean, we never had $1 million to spend in 24 hours, so we never asked that question. But I think having that brought on us, it's like, it's sparking the right kind of interest in the right areas. And I think that's a question we got to ask ourselves. Like, when we have more resources to spend, where do we spend it to get us to that next level, rather than trying to think, okay, well, I have $1 million, cool. Like, should I go buy an Aston Martin, or do I go spend it on something that's going to elevate us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's fascinating. One thought-provoking question that we kind of do on our Friday mornings is, we ask the team, what can we do to 10x our business, right? And like, I just find that asking questions that are almost seemingly absurd, like obviously if you knew the answer about how to 10x your business, you'd be doing it. But if you ask those like really absurd questions, because like 10x, that's a big jump, right? Like that's actually really hard to do. But if you ask those crazy questions, you might just start thinking, oh, well, like the only way we could possibly do it is if we 100x our offer volume. Well, how would we do that? Well, we actually would need like 3 more people writing offers, right? And we would need, 1,000 times the lead generation done. Well, how could we possibly reach 1,000 times more people, right? And I think that these trains of thought are actually super valuable to ask ourselves about, like, what's going on in our business and why do we do what we do? Like, is there actually a reason behind why we're currently doing what we do today? And I think that opens us up to good first principles thinking approaches, where we're thinking, what if we just scrapped it all today? How would we rebuild the business, right? So
I love that, because I find that a lot of people are too quick to tell themselves narrative as to why they can't do something, rather than spark the initial question that's going to lead to more questions that will lead to the infrastructure that you have to build to get to the next level, right? And like you said, 10x, like, it's a high arbitrary number, but I think for me, it's more of like a mindset, right? Like, how do you really 10x your business? Like, what kind of questions do you have to ask to start scaling to that level, right? And I like how you said that the questions lead to next questions, which leads to more action, right? And I think we'll have to understand that asking those questions and taking those massive actions and executions will lead to greater results than just trying to tell yourself a narrative as to why you can't do something. Problems are profits.
Absolutely.
Problems are profits.
Problems are profits.
I love it.
I love it. Awesome. Last warm-up question here is just, why are you you?
Why are you? Well, I mean, outside of the usual like genetic stuff, I think that all the decisions that you've made in your life, good, bad, stupid, smart, really make up the person you are today. So, I mean, obviously everyone's been through all different kinds of life experiences, but what they make out of it, or, you know, the decisions that they made out of it really do make up who they are today and why they do what they do today as well. So honestly, I think that's what really makes someone who they are, is everything that has happened throughout their life and all the small little decisions that they've made to get them to this point, is why we are who we are. I mean, even for us, like all of our life decisions that we've made, even opening the salon and then failing and going back into arbitrage full time. And
I think to build on that, like, you know, I think what makes you you is essentially what's between your ears, right? Like your mind process and how you think, right? Because for me, I think that, like, people always like to ask, like, you know, is the glass half empty or half full? But I like to kind of look at it as like, well, it's at 50% capacity and there's the opportunity to fill it to the top, right? So I've always been more of like an opportunist. And I think that the resiliency that I have and just like not being able to take no for an answer, even like, I think as annoying as I may have been in the earlier stages of my life, I think really kind of shifted me to be who I am today. So that's kind of my answer.
Exactly.
I love that. I love that, guys. I definitely really appreciate too with your responses. It's really like a life cycle of all of the experiences that you have that lead to the thoughts that you have, that leads to your decision making, and I can definitely appreciate that. And everyone comes from different places and different perspectives. So when you can just align those thoughts in the direction that you want to go, that's really powerful. And I really appreciate how you're talking from all of those little pieces and all of those life experiences that lead to those decisions. So what I want to do here now is I'd love to actually, just for the people listening who maybe haven't heard of you guys or experienced what you guys do, I'd love just for you to break down a little bit about what exactly your business is, how you got started in it, and just why you did that in the first place. So I'd love to just, for the audience, just have you guys break down what exactly it is that you guys do and why.
Well, first and foremost, we're real estate investors at heart. But in terms of our business, it's rental arbitrage, where we rent at a set rate from an investor or landlord. And then we take those units and put it onto Airbnb with their permission. And we profit the difference, right? And that's kind of what our business is.
That's what our business is. And then our investments have also kind of geared towards that direction as well. We sort of incorporate our business into our investments, and not always, but that's sort of how we're gearing everything towards, especially now. But I mean, the reason we got started was no particular reason, actually. It was more of we knew that we wanted to do something for many years. Aaron and I worked, you know, all the time, like Christmas, New Year's, doesn't even matter what day of the month it was. We were always working, and we never really had a clear idea of what we wanted to do with it or where we wanted to go, but we just knew that there was a higher purpose for us. And like
then, we wanted to invest in real estate, but we're just like, well, we don't have the funds for a down payment. So we started asking ourselves, like, what can we do to get involved in the rental game without having to spend all that money up front? So the initial kind of thing that came to me was, what if we were to rent houses from people with the permission to sublet, right? Because I just saw like a big disparity in the rental prices for an entire house in our area versus the room for rent, right? So like for example, you could take a house and rent it for say like $4,000 a month, and it would have like say like 6 or 7 bedrooms, and then you could rent each bedroom out for say like $1,000 per month. And then I was thinking, well, like, what if we could create like a win-win situation where, you know, the landlord's winning because now they're offloading this entire house to someone else. And then we take that problem of actually subleasing each and every single room to someone else for that profit. So we just saw the opportunity to capitalize on that spread. And that's kind of where we ran with it.
Yeah. And I mean, where we live, I had friends all the time who would rent rooms, and you would see that happening. And then you kind of get the idea like, okay, well, there's this giant house and you're just living with a whole bunch of people in this house, and you just rent one room from it. So it was sort of like, okay, well, how does that work? And then going to visit their houses and seeing, how the landlord has systemized everything. And then obviously, like, there isn't too many people, there isn't that much demand for somebody who wants to rent a 10-bedroom or a 7-bedroom house, for example. So we saw that as an opportunity where we can rent something like that, give the landlord that kind of opportunity to work with someone like us. And then we would just take that and try to optimize
a lot
it.
of these houses would sit on the market for months, right, before someone would actually take them.
Exactly.
So
there just isn't the demand for it.
There's a problem. So why don't we profit off of it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's super cool, guys. I actually have a pretty similar sort of origin story into how I selected my strategy, right? I was like, $20,000 in debt or something like that. My credit score was fine, but not great. And I certainly didn't have a down payment for a property. So that's sort of how I selected the wholesaling approach, because it was one way where I could just, if you don't have time, you probably have money, or excuse me, if you don't have money, you probably have time.
Exactly.
And so that was the one thing I knew I had. And that's how I initially partnered up with Matt to really figure out the wholesaling strategy, because it seemed like a way where I could just go spend all day knocking doors, and eventually I would get a deal, right? And we spent like $300 on magnets from Vistaprint that said like, we buy houses or whatever. And I would just go out door knocking and leave a magnet on every door, every mailbox. And after about 3 months of doing that, or even more maybe, we eventually got that first deal done. And it was just incredible to see that you could take almost no money and still play the real estate game. I mean,
it was a B2B deal, right?
Yeah. Well, the first deal I did was a wholesale deal, but that deal inspired going out and like hustling another few months to end up getting that VTB deal. But my first deal was a 96% VTB at 3% for 13 years, which is hectic, but no, it's insane. But again, like that just comes down, again, problems or profits. That comes down to sticking it out long enough in order to actually go and find that diamond in the rough. And that took a lot of time and energy, but not necessarily a lot of money. So that was a really cool way to enter the market. So I guess the whole point of saying all this is just, you actually don't need a lot of money to play the game, right? Sometimes you can get creative and enter the space without necessarily having to have a trust fund or a rich family or a bunch of money saved from your daytime job.
And I think that's the limiting factor that a lot of people have, is they feel like they need to have all this money to put towards a down payment before they can actually get into real estate. But for us, I mean, we went in with like $20,000 that we've saved up over the years after working. And it was like first and last month's rent plus furniture costs that we really had to cover. So when you think about it, right? Yeah, it was a lot of sweat equity in the beginning, but when you start, I mean, you have to be able to put in that sweat equity. Otherwise, what else can you put in?
And I think that's a really good point you guys brought up. Is like, when you don't have the money, when you don't have the financing, when you don't have like the people, the network to kind of execute on something, it's like, a lot of people are very quick to tell themselves a narrative as to like why they can't do a deal. But if you don't have the money, like how can you find that money? If you don't have the financing, how can you get that financing? Always ask the question of how, right? And if you don't know these answers, like find people who know the answers, right? That's leverage, right? If you can't learn something yourself, always go out there and try to find someone who has spent the time and the years to figure out their processes and try to see if, they're willing to share with you, right? And I always say, like, take the value first approach. A lot of people just like hit you up on DMs and stuff and say, hey, listen, how'd you do that? Like, would you be willing to mentor me or something like that? But it's like, what kind of value are you bringing to the table first, right? And I think just asking those questions and kind of getting yourself in the right room with the right people is powerful. And I think that's kind of what people need to start doing more of.
And it was that kind of switch in our mindset as well that really helped us grow to where we are today.
Like we were servers for the longest time. Like we were working at restaurants, making tip money. Like we didn't have a T4 to get financing. Like for us, it was like, well, how can we get that financing? Can we get a cosigner? Can we get JVs? Like we've never had any kind of T4 where we can qualify for a lender financing. We always had to be creative with the deal. And I think, you know, having that kind of problems head on kind of force us to be as creative as possible to where are we going to get the money, where are we going to get financing, and who are we going to reach out to who knows how to get this deal from A to B done. Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I absolutely love that. And I really want to highlight that point. Like, this is the no-brainer secret that nobody does, but everyone should, is like, how can you add value to others and have a symbiotic relationship there? Like, I really love that piece that you highlighted of like, yeah, go find the person who knows how to do it and leverage their knowledge, leverage their network. If you don't have the money, time, or resources or whatever it might be, like, go find the person who does. But don't just need and want from them. Like, how can you add value to their business, add value to their life? Like, what is their why, and how can you service that so that everyone can win? And one thing that I love about your business model, and my first real estate deal was also a wholesale deal, and you know, it like coming from a place where I still had student debts, I didn't have a lot of money saved up. Like, how was I going to get into the market? Well, creating value. And that is really what you've done in your business, is you've found a problem and you've gone in and you've created value for these landlords where houses were sitting. You saw an opportunity where things weren't necessarily moving in the direction that person wanted, and they maybe were tired or didn't want to put in the effort to do the model that you've implemented. And once you have the systems and processes built up, like, you can literally specialize and do that and run it like a well-oiled machine and add that value to anyone who you work with. So it's really fantastic. And I want to highlight like what you've done there in your business model, because really every element of that is adding value for each person. You're adding value for the renter, and you're adding value for the landlord who owns the house. And you guys are profiting from that too. You've created win-win solutions for everyone here. And that is just such an important lesson that is such a no-brainer, but not everyone does. So I really want to highlight that in what you guys have said there.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's really, and that's really what escalated our business, because even with our arbitrage, when we first started and we were trying to go to landlords and ask for permission to rent, initially it was all about, you know, why we want to rent from you and all this stuff, rather than targeting what their problems are, how we can solve their problems, and what we can do to help, and how we can sort of work together to make that happen. Once we started gearing our pitch towards that way, we started getting a lot more success, way more opportunities that came our way. And then that's really what escalated our business.
Yeah, because, you know, in the beginning, it was a lot of just hitting up random Kijiji ads saying, hey, listen, I want to rent from you. Like, do you mind if we Airbnb it? And they would just tell us to F off, right? Like, they don't want us to. You would just
talk about like your business and, you know, what we're going to do with the property, rather than talking about what we can do to help their problems, what we can do to, you know, like, oh, we're going to help manage your property, we're going to keep it clean and all this stuff. We were just talking about ourselves the entire time.
And like, we were trying to like address all the potential risk factors that they were worried about. Like, oh, you know, and don't worry, people aren't going to party in your place and stuff like that. Instead, like, once we started shifting that pitch more towards like a solution-oriented angle, that's kind of when we started to really get into the groove of, you know, people saying, hey, listen, I hear you guys are like the professional, you know, arbitrage people. You guys solve people's problems. Like, you know, do you want to rent my units from me? Right? Because, you know, we're also the perfect tenant. Plus, we're going to manage your property. There's going to be less wear and tear on your property. There's going to be professional staging, professional photography. Like, there's a whole arsenal of benefits that you're going to get from having us as your tenants, right? And kind of putting your best foot forward and kind of selling your value proposition to the landlords really kind of started to get the groove going.
So what you're talking about is you focused on the profits, not the problems,
exactly,
right? Like that literally, it works both ways, right? Because you always want to focus on the profits for your own business too, by solving problems. But that's the same way you need to talk to the person on the other side of the table, because they already know their problems, right? They already know they got enough shit on their plate. but it's really cool when you give them solutions, and that's where I think they can see the profit too. Oh, wow, this is professional management. I will have to do less. It will potentially even earn me more per month. I know we've done one re-rental as well, like arbitrage situation, and it was an interesting experience, but we were able to offer a lot of benefits, as you're saying, to the landlord. We were actually able to overpay their rent, and we were willing to do so because we were able to almost double that with our Airbnb revenue. Now, again, we didn't go too far with that business because we jumped away too far. We didn't go into scaling it as you guys clearly have, right? And you guys specialized in it. So that was one of our little experiments that didn't work so well because it wasn't our primary focus.
And as wholesalers, you guys are professional problem solvers as well, right? So that's a lot of value you add to people who want to sell their house quickly.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, of course, we'll address some of their problems too. Like, hey, you guys, I'm sure you know that the roof's leaking, right? I'm sure you know that everything needs to be replaced and that there's bed bugs or whatever. But that's not really the pitch, right? They already know that stuff. They've been thinking about it for years, and that's been holding them back. Too, we actually understand their motivation deep enough to know that that's been also holding them back from selling it on market, right? They already know these problems. So what we focus on is not that. We focus on, hey, this has probably been a big challenge for you. We're here today to offer you this solution, which is a fast close with very little hassle and very little inconvenience, right? We're going to do like 2 or 3 walkthroughs, and then bingo, it's going to be wrapped up. As long as we can come to an agreeable price, right? Price and terms. So I think that is always the approach, right? Is focus on what's in it for me, but from their approach.
100%.
That's absolutely accurate. I love it. One thing that I always love finding out from different, entrepreneurs and business owners is there any problems? Maybe it be something like the salon that you see an opportunity in, but you just don't have the time, or it would just distract you way too much to take down. Like any opportunities or problems in the market that if you just had that extra 10 hours in a day, you see a huge opportunity here and would love to take that thing down.
I would like to take this question and apply it to our business because it's something that's been on my mind lately. It's that I think as business owners, there's an element of ego that prevents you from understanding that you are the bottleneck in your business, right? Like we as business owners just love to kind of get involved in the business, right? Like because you feel like you can make a better executive decision than the next guy, right? But the truth of the matter is, once you kind of set aside your ego, is that every single component of your business that you feel is not replaceable is in fact replaceable, right? Anyone else can make those decisions that you are making. And as long as that person is making decisions at 60% to 70% of what you could do yourself, that's more important because there's the element of speed, right? The velocity of money as well, right? So, and as long as you have a problems or profits approach in your business and deeply rooted into the culture of your business, like any setback that you really face, as long as it's not you're going to go bankrupt or something, right? You can always pivot and come back stronger, right? From learning from that mistake. And I think that's something that's been on my mind lately, is that we're kind of still too much involved in making the executive decisions in our business, even though we've kind of outsourced and systemized all the day-to-day stuff, the setup, the design and stuff. But now it's like, how do we really kind of take a step back from the business and have people who are going to vet the deals, who are going to make the decision to take on more units, rather than us having to, look at these video walkthroughs all day and then say, okay, well, this is good, this is not good, and so on and so forth. And that's kind of like one of my big pain points.
Yeah, and even just getting a unit set up and starting the operations of it is a whole process. So that's another thing that we've been thinking about. Like we have to be able to outsource that, because right now and so far, we've sort of been the ones who have been taking on the deals, have been involved in getting the units ready and making sure that the team is on track for the due date and everything. So and scheduling all of those things. So and now we're sort of, especially now that we're in Florida and we don't really have the time to be, or we don't want to have the time to be dedicating towards that part of the business, and we want to think more about, what are we best at, and looking at searching for other opportunities elsewhere is more important to us than being involved in the business, trying to set up these units and get them ready and make sure that the team is, on track. We need someone else to be able to do that now, and that's something we're coming to realize and working on as well.
We babysit the process too much.
Yeah, that's what it is.
I think that was one of the biggest game changers in our business this year. And if I'm being really honest with myself, only in the last like 3 to 6 months have I really, really, really taken ownership of that. And just said to myself, like, I need to stop doing anything, almost anything, right? Mm-hmm. Because the reality is, I think I've done a really good job at hiring the right people. And if you think you did that, then you need to get the hell out of their way, right? And this counts for service providers too. They don't need to be employees. But if you've got the right team, right, get the hell out of their way. Mm-hmm. Rebecca's better at doing the things that she does on our team than I am. And I'll never be that good. And that's the reality. So let her do her damn job. And I think really I only started truly embracing that idea in the last 3 to 6 months. And the difference in our business's health, as well as my like well-being in the business, is so much better because I'm spending way more time now on things that actually matter. Like really strategic high level things rather than any type of tactical day-to-day thing. And I really I can't tell you how important that's been for the growth of our business. Like to the tune of, we did our whole last year in the first quarter. Right. And so like when you get results like that, you have to really respond, right? And really recognize what you did differently. And I think the big thing was just hiring more people and spending the time hiring rather than spending the time on, whatever the day-to-day grind is, whatever that silly little daily problem is, when the reality is, if you hired the right people in general, or if you've got the right team, they can do anything you can do at least 50% as good. Right. Mm-hmm. But probably a lot more. They can probably do anything you do at least 80% as good. And if that's the case, just let them do it. Right.
The fact that they can actually make a decision right then and there is much more important than them having to bring that problem to you and involving you, and then having that be a 2-step process when it can be a 1-step process.
Yeah. Just the speed alone is probably inherently better than any type of delay that then has to have maybe a slightly better plan. Right. Mm-hmm. I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that I think we've done really well on our team is operate with core values, and every person on the team can execute on that decision based off of what our core values are. Because absolutely, you highlighted such a good fact there, Aaron, is that bottleneck is that you're the bottleneck in your business 9 times out of 10. So if you can empower your employees to be making those decisions in those moments, they don't have to keep coming back and checking and adding time to the decision-making process. Like when we have that like constant check back and, yep, this is good. No, yep, no, rather than them actually just making the call on the spot, even if they're wrong, like making the call on the spot and learning from it. It just allows everyone to move so much faster and just really be agile in the business and not go through the like check process back and forth that ends up taking up days rather than minutes in a split-second decision. So when you start from that, like, this is how our team makes decisions and this is how we operate, these are our team's core values, like that is something that I've seen come from Matt and Adam that just has allowed for the company to grow and accelerate so quickly, with everyone doing that kind of decentralized command of making the decisions that work best for the business in that moment. So I really love that you highlighted that, because so many businesses and so many entrepreneurs fall into that fallacy of just wanting to be in control and wanting to be the person who controls every element of decision making in their business. So it is hard to take a step back, though. It's not easy, because once you aren't the one making the decisions, like it extra has to work. It must work because you're no longer in there seeing it happen. So I really love that you highlighted that.
And it's kind of crazy because I've been following your company, right? Like I see what you guys are doing, and I can almost pinpoint the timeline as to like when you guys started to really kind of implement those things, because that's when I saw the biggest growth in your team and like the biggest kind of like more wholesale deals coming out, more activity in general. You can really kind of see it as like a third party like person looking in. And I think that's really great that you guys did that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So before we wrap up here, I'd love to hear just some closing thoughts from you guys on like what's next for you. Like we've had so much dialogue around like building and scaling. So like what's actually the plan now? What's next for you? What are the big hurdles that you have facing your business to overcome?
Well, what's next? Like we have some more units coming up in Canada, but I think now we're trying to broaden the scope and see where we can expand across the border. So that's kind of why we're in Florida. We just booked a one-way ticket. I don't know when we're going to come back, but the next step for us is really trying to figure out if we can replicate the same processes and systems here and expand in Florida, Texas, LA,
or even just out, even not in the
like
US and
Europe,
other
Italy.
Exactly.
Right.
And I think when Aaron and I were discussing, we thought, well, where do we want to go with this, and what's really like our endpoint for our business? And we thought, well, it'd be really great if we were able to replicate this kind of system just globally. So if you were like, you see all these resorts and stuff, like because we specialize in short-term rentals. We see all these resorts when you go to Mexico or when you go to Europe, and we see so much opportunity there. And we think, well, what if we were to own something like that? What if we were to operate or own a resort of some sort? Wouldn't that be kind of cool? So now we're sort of thinking, and we've already gone into the vacation rental game as well with the motel that we purchased not long ago, and we just see a lot of opportunity there. And it's different from what we were doing up till now, but it's still within what we specialize in. So that's sort of like where we want to take it. And now we're just thinking about scaling exponentially and how we can grow to be a global company rather than just being a small Canadian company.
And fact of the matter is, people love travel. Like travel is not going to die out. We've seen travel demand, spike during COVID, where arguably it's been the most difficult to travel, right? So whether it's people traveling internationally or people just traveling within their own borders, like there's always going to be demand to get away and kind of unplug yourself for a brief period of time. So I think kind of positioning yourself to be the provider of these experiences for people, I think is a strong why and a goal for us, because we love traveling, right?
Exactly.
And I think a big component of that is like, I want to be able to take care of my family. I want to be able to create, real great experiences for my kids as well. And, being able to travel, set up more Airbnbs and be able to stay at our own places, I think that would be a really cool thing. So that's kind of where we're shifting our focus to is, and like us being in Florida right now and setting up more Airbnbs in Canada has been like not really a challenge, but a real eye opener to see that, we can set up more and more Airbnbs and get more into contract and then set it up and have it listed live, even though we're not physically there. Right.
Exactly.
And I think that's kind of been one of our limiting beliefs.
Yeah, like we have to be there and, we want to oversee everything. But another eye opener at least for me, was that when we got here and we started realizing that, we want to be able to spend 100% of our time just dedicated to seeing what Florida has to offer, rather than having, 10 minutes or an hour here and there having to focus on what's happening back in Canada. So that was another thing where we were just talking about bottleneck, right? Is how can we systemize that? How do we bring more people into now where we don't have to be so involved in what's happening in Canada, and we can completely zone out of there and really focus on what we're here to do. So that was another big eye opener for us. I think when you travel and your business is overseas, you realize that there's definitely space and there's definitely areas of improvement that you can make in your business.
Yeah, that's super, guys. I think COVID was one of the cooler things to happen to our company, not because the real estate market was so hot and whatever, but more so because we legitimately were separated from all of our people for a little while, right? Like
Mhm.
last year in March or something, when nobody knew what the hell was going on, we actually thought this could be a real virus. We were like, how the hell do we run our business completely remote? Because that's like the opposite of what we used to do. So we had to come up with these cool things. We started doing, morning workouts together on Zoom. We started doing our book club. We started doing all these other little impact night, like where we all kind of tune into a common video or a common lesson learned via Zoom, which is just so crazy. And then obviously just the adoption of Zoom, right? All of our meetings before had to be in person. Well, holy shit, how many thousands of hours of drive time and just shit have we saved this year by just learning that, oh my God, telecommunications are a thing and video conferencing is possible. So I love that, right? And I think it was really cool to reimagine our business and just kind of scrap everything we used to do and figure out how could we do it. And that, again, is just the problems or profits mentality. So super glad that we're coming to a lot of these conclusions from totally different angles and totally different business models. And I think that that's a really interesting takeaway from this podcast, right? Is two totally different groups of people can have a completely different experience and come together on sort of a united front that problems or profits is real, right? It's just a mindset, and everything that comes at you is really just it's how you deal with it, right? And how you move forward. So I really appreciate it having you guys on the podcast. And I think this was a cool opportunity as well to get to know you guys a bit more. And thank you so much for coming on. And for anybody out there listening, keep going, right? Find solutions.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you very much.
Awesome.
Cheers, guys.
Thanks so much for coming on, guys. And before we conclude, where is the best place for people to find you guys?
Instagram.
I do everything on Instagram.
Yep.
Awesome. So make sure you follow along both of these two on Instagram. What's your Instagram handle for the listeners?
Mine is Ari Yoo, so ARIIYOO.
And mine is BaeMoney _.
All right, sweet. We're going to put both of those in the description because no one's going to know how to spell that in about 3 seconds. So those will both be in the description. Go ahead, click on it, follow these guys, and make sure you reshare this content as you're listening to it. Sharing is caring, and the more people we can help out with these types of discussions, the more we're engaged and the more we want to have these types of discussions. So please get after it, share this content, and let's make it happen.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, guys.